and welcome to Tea and Tales. My name is Nikki Madigan. I'm the curator at the museum, and this is Dana Andrews. She's our program and promotion supervisor. This year's theme for Tea and Tales is transportation, and the 7 tea topics are based on the 7 story panels that were researched and created last winter for the new transportation exhibit. We're going to pick up this year where we left off last year. Last year we celebrated the arrival of the railway. It came in 1914, so last year was a 100-year anniversary of the arrival of the railway. And we wanted to start this year's season of Tea and Tales off by talking about life after the railway. As once the train came, this era brought expanded services, economy, and population to the area. So this presentation will highlight the schools that anchored the small communities in the Meadows, Birkin, and at Pemberton Station. And we'll also present some of the important farmer institutions and the agricultural products established in the period of 1915 through to about the 1950s. We're going to show images from the museum archives in this presentation, and we're using the Pemberton history book. Thanks for coming today. I know it's really smoky, and we appreciate your support of the Tea and Tales program. So in 1912, the first school was built. This was the Spuds School. It was built to accommodate the Spuds children. Essentially, they had a lot of children, and they needed the school for their girls, and they also hired their own teacher and built the school on their property. Molly Garvin and Gladys Blakeway both taught there. After the railway came in 1914, some families opted for lessons by mail. And by 1919, after much lobbying by William Spetch, the BC government set up the oldest and what is now known as the largest system of correspondence education in Canada.
Next up we have the Upper Valley School, which was built in 1915. The Upper Valley School was built for the children of the Ronan, Punch, Dermody, and Ross family. Perkins Mill supplied the lumber, and local men built and maintained it. Mothers scrubbed and cleaned the building. In 1929, a new, larger school was built and remains today as part of the Copper Dome Lodge building. We have the Upper Valley School, the early years. In 1924, on the top, we have a picture of the front row from left to right. Kathleen Ronan, Eddie Ronan, Dorothy Vanderhook, Tessie Ronan. The boys in the rear are Bart Ryan, Robbie Miller, Dick Green, and the teacher is probably Sheila Connellan. And the bottom picture we have is from 1916, the second year of the school being open. And the teacher is Margaret Mellish, later Mrs. Ray Elliott. Front row, Tristan James Punch. Middle row, John Roman, Norman Dermody, Gerald Ross. And in the back row, Sandy and Vivian Ross Ronan, Rainey and Helen Dermody.
You had a school built, and you had Spetches out in Owl Creek with their own little school, as well as getting a correspondence system. We also had some attempts at dairying in Pemberton. It was tough to find a lot of references to this, but in our collection in Shant's house, we do have these Pemberton fresh milk and cream milk tabs, so I'll pass those around just to prove to you that this was a going concern back in the early part of the century. So the first person that thought a milk run would be a good idea was this lady right here. This is Dora Barber, and her and her husband Charles had moved into Pemberton from Squamish in 1912. They actually were in Pemberton prior to that, and then left, went to Squamish, and then returned again in 1912. Their farm in 1912 was located where Kiora Trailer Park is today. So she came up with a very rudimentary system which involved a horse and some hand-sewn sacks for milk bottles, and this was Pemberton's first milk run. Jack Ronan in the history book, though, also says that after the railway came, farmers started to do a little dairying, and as long as the cream was sweet, they did well, and for some years, dairy was the sole means of revenue. In 1932, a cream cooler was built at the PGE station, that's the railroad station, and the Board of Trade looked into establishing a creamery in the district. So from the time the railroad came through to even the mid-30s, there was still this effort to create a dairying industry in Pemberton. I just wanted to tell you a little bit about Charles Barbour, because we found this out through our forestry research in 2012. The Barbour Brothers logging company was made up of Alan and his brother Charles. And they logged the lower Chickness River from 1900 to 1907. Then Charles moved up to the Pemberton Valley. But the Barbour Brothers sold that logging camp, their holdings and a steam donkey engine, to Yap's Squamish Timber Company Limited. Yap's Timber Company was the first logging company to put a railroad in 1912, and that's how they got the logs out of the forest in Squamish. So Charles and Dora were interesting people, and I believe it was Jack Ronan's farm originally was Charles Barbour's land in about 1905.
So the second school that we've had built here was Birkin, and built in 1922. The community of Birkin held a work bee and built a school for their children to attend. Mr. M.B. Pullinger was the first teacher of the school, and it operated until 1944. The building was used as a community hall, and it was a hub of community activity for many years. The school is still standing there today, and there are plans underway to preserve it for even longer. And then here's a picture of the Birkin School group from 1922, which is when they opened. We have Ernie Ward, Mrs. Taylor, an unknown, Mrs. Craddock, and then the middle row. So the middle row we have Charlie Fredstorp, Mrs. Thompson, Mrs. Pullinger, Miss Pullinger, and in the front row we have Charlie Carlson, Kester Taylor, Lola Taylor, and then the children are Ida Taylor, Helen Thompson, Gordon Taylor, unknown, Harvey Taylor, and Galen Taylor.
So the Taylors were obviously a going concern in Birkin, and this is part of why the school was built, was for the Taylors. The next thing that happened in the 20s is, up until the 20s, the farmers weren't very organized. Everyone was just farming, doing their thing, and there wasn't much shipping en masse of products out of Pemberton. But in 1922, the first fall fair was organized. In 1925, the Farmers Institute was established. This created reasons for farmers to greatly increase their acreages, and government agricultural experts started to come to Pemberton to provide advice, like this is what we think you should grow here in the mountains in this kind of climate. The purpose of the Institute was to promote conditions of rural life so that settlement may be permanent and prosperous. By the late 1920s, Pemberton cream was ruled to be sour, and prices dropped. Commercial potatoes, however, became a dominant crop. The netted gem was an award-winning potato grown by W.C. Green in 1926. And by 1939, a total of 18 awards were won by Pemberton farmers. Top honors were achieved for field peas, turnips, and potatoes. The Fall Fair was first organized in 1922. A professional from the Department of Agriculture judged the exhibits. After judging, he spoke about the seed certification program for potatoes. And soon after this first fair, W.C. Green secured 100 pounds of netted gem seed potatoes from Lillooet. A year later, he sold a ton of seed to Will Miller. The 1929 Fall Fair, and the images that you see in the slide here are from that fair. You can see there was an impressive array of trophies that were handed out by MLA Ernie Carson. In 1933, an illustration station was established at the Ernest Blakeway farm and ran for 10 years. The purpose of an illustration station was to present standards provided by Agriculture Canada around the production of certain crops. Farmer Institute directors through this period had to store blasting powder in their houses until the 40s. I thought that was an interesting side note for a volunteer director job, that on the side you would have to store blasting powder at your home. And in the late 30s, just to give you a sense of some of the prices of these products, turnips were selling for $1 a pound and carrots were selling for $1.25 a pound. In 1931, the men formed a second organization to market farm crops. The Pemberton and District Board of Trade was formed. One of their first initiatives was to invite a potato broker as a speaker, as members wanted advice about marketing their product. The gross return for a ton of commercial potatoes was $17.50 in 1927. It was $53 in 1929. And back down to $11.50 in 1931. So now I just want to talk about some of the awards that farmers won in the area in that early era. And they began winning top honors in potatoes, turnips, and field peas starting in the 1930s. Winning gave wide advertising of the area's agricultural products. Despite multiple awards, the farmers were still concerned with the marketing and sales of their products. The slide is showing a cartoon of John O. Decker when he received one of the highest awards you could receive for certified seed potatoes, the American Potash Institute Prize. I just want to tell you a few more stories about some of the prizes that were won. So in 1931, John Decker won a first and second prize for his exhibit at the Toronto Royal Winter Fair. In 1933, Decker, the Ronan brothers, and Bob Taylor won 5 awards at the Royal Winter Fair in Toronto. The following year, Decker and Ronan brothers took home 7. In 1935, the fair gave high honors to the Decker and Ross brothers. In 1937, John Decker won the highest award for certified seed potatoes, the American Potash Institute Prize, and he was awarded a gold watch at an awards banquet. And this awards banquet had some of the movers and shakers of the day, people like Fred W. Smeltz, who was the chairman of BC Electric, H.N. McLeod, and F.M. Clement. In the same year he won that prize, he was the first British Columbian to win top prize for field peas in Chicago. He won 3 more times in a row and was barred from competing for 3 years. But then he entered one more time and won again. At the 1937 Vancouver Winter Seed Fair, Decker, Green, and Ross brothers won 4 first prizes and 1 second. In 1938, the Farmers Institute won a Challenge Cup for the best display, and Decker, Cooper, and Ronan brothers won 8 awards, including 5 firsts for certified potato seed. Decker and Ross also won for turnips. In 1938, the Ross brothers won first and second prizes for seed potatoes in Toronto, and Decker came first as well. Despite all these awards, farmers were still concerned with marketing their products. And they sent letters to the nearby mining communities up in Braylorn and Pioneer, looking to solicit orders. So in that same year, Bert Perkins, Fred Mahan, and Fred Oman took loaded pack horses through Railway Pass from the Upper Meadows over to Goldbridge and brought agricultural products from Pemberton. At the time, people were keenly interested in the medical discovery that turnips had the same healthful benefits as orange juice if you squeeze them and drink them. So the route that they took, this is the Upper Meadows, and these are the gold mines up here. This is the Hurley River. So today the Hurley River Forest Service Road generally follows the Hurley River. So this was probably the route that they took to get up into the mining towns. However, it was only a one-time thing, so I'm thinking it turned out to not be as lucrative as they'd hoped to bring those products there.
Well, we've made it up to 1929 now, the Pemberton Station School. After the railway arrived, the growing community of Pemberton Station needed a school. Like Upper Valley residents, people in town were greatly involved in financing and constructing the new building. Bertha Bussey Green was the first teacher, and she recalled that volunteers were still hammering away the morning school began. Another opening day setback was the lack of an outhouse, but unfortunately the school was surrounded by trees and bushes. The Upper Valley Middle School was also rebuilt in 1929, and the two schools had a keen rivalry in sports for many years. We are at the Montcurry School from the 1930s to the 1950s. In the 1930s, a one-room school was constructed and served the community until the 1950s. A second building was constructed in the late 40s. In 1948, the Missionary Sisters of Christ took charge of all teaching duties through 1966 and beyond. The scholarship winner for Montcurry was the first resident to become a teacher. Her name was Mary Louise Williams, and she eventually returned to the Pemberton Valley after serving in various provincial schools. Despite these efforts to provide local schooling, many Montcurry children were sent away to residential schools in Vancouver, Mission, Williams, Lake, and Kamloops. Unfortunately, right now at this time, we don't have very much information about the school, and we don't really have any pictures or anything, but we are really working on that. So this is called Class History by Florence Peters, or Florence Andrew Nee Peters, and she wrote it in June of 1967. In September of 1956, 35 eager students rushed into the Pemberton schoolhouse to start the first year of their education. We were happy, carefree, and ready and anxious to learn. It's too bad the enthusiasm died off as the years went away. As each year passed, some of us made it to the next grade, and if we didn't, we tried and tried again. We were the typical average school kid, which means we weren't very average or typical. We needed our teachers as much as any other class did. But we weren't so bad. We weren't so good either. But I won't get into that. We all had our share of awards, threats, praise, and detentions, which helped to pull us through. After we finished grade 6, we were all enthusiastic again, because we had half of our education already, and we only had 6 more years to go. They told us about this new system they thought up, where they changed the math, science, and the whole education system. We not only had to know what 2 and 2 made, but we had to know why. That year, 5 years ago, was the turning point in our school life. We were separated into categories, the academic and the non-academic. If you knew what 2 and 2 made and why it made 4, you were academic. If you only knew it made 4, you were non-academic. In our 8th grade, the school board decided that they would have the Montcurry students over at Pemberton, so they brought us over, and most of us had our first taste of public school. We decided it wasn't so bad, so we stayed there for 4 years. In grade 9, our class was made up of about 28 pupils. This was 35 according to the new math. Altogether, considering the ones who left and the ones who came and those who stayed. In grade 10, there were about 20 hopefuls, still pushing pencils, needling teachers, and frustrating parents. We lost the other 8 to other schools, or to the cruel working world. I think this was the best year our class had together. We learned, needled, and worked quite hard so that at the end of the year, we were rewarded with a class picnic. We ended our fun-filled day by throwing our teacher into the icy waters of Anderson Lake. It wasn't even swimming season, but it was still fun though. And if the rotten egg fight we had coming home. Or and was the rotten egg fight we had coming home. We never did have another class picnic. In grade 11, we realized we had to get down to business. So we did. We were exceptionally good, exceptionally studious, you name it. We were the exceptions. Grade 12 was another matter. We started the year with only 13 students. I don't really know what happened to the other 22 we had started out with in grade 1. We crammed and crammed and crammed some more as our last school year came to an end. Through some unknown force of circumstance, I'm proud to say we all made it. And as we stand here tonight, you can be sure we are as ready to fight the world as we were when we started 12 years ago.
Another organization that emerged, the advent of machinery in the 1940s made a big difference in potato production. So the cooperative was founded in 1941 and it operated through to 1966. And its chief objective was to help farmers acquire feed and supplies more cheaply. And it was an important service. It served as the chief shipping and receiving outlet for all of Pemberton. The co-op is today where the animal barn is. The building still stands and the railway tracks are right beside it. Records show, when we have 26 boxes of records from the co-op, that the co-op not only received and shipped potatoes and turnips, it also received washing machine parts, lumber and nails, even a television antenna. When the highway arrived in 1966, the co-op was no longer needed because as a farmer you could get shipments directly to your farm or you could ship directly out from your farm. Machinery like the mechanical planter and sprayer and the whirligig, a mechanical harvesting machine, and we have one of these in the front yard. Those were some of the new tools farmers could use. Tractors and chain diggers required large work crews for harvesting, and this created seasonal employment for people of Mount Currie and Pemberton Station. The first trustees were Edmund Ronan, John Ronan, Ernest Blakeway, Frank Kershaw, Gunnar Gims, and Harold Wyatt Purdy. The co-op started with a small store at the railway tracks and then changed to focus on the mass shipment and marketing of turnips and potatoes. And they were using the Interior Vegetable Marketing Board. There's actually a couple paragraphs how Pemberton was part of the Coast Marketing Board initially and felt that they weren't getting the attention that they deserved and that the decisions by the Coast Board were dominated by farmers on Vancouver Island. So they switched instead to the Interior Vegetable Marketing Board, which was out of Kamloops. The Snowflake brand was a registered trademark of the District Board of Trade and it was used by the co-op. And in 1954, this is when the large warehouse was built for washing and sorting root crops prior to shipping. This became a real concern in the 50s in Canada, and these root houses and washing houses were built actually all across Canada with federal funds. It was a fund from the Queen herself who funded these stations next to railway stations. The animal barn, ironically, still sells animal feed. I think that's pretty cool, because that's really what the co-op used to do. The co-op, throughout its life, did skate on the very thin ice of one financial crisis after another, but it did serve a very useful purpose as a shipping agent and supplier at a time when transportation was extremely difficult. In 1949, a seed potato control area was formed in Pemberton, which meant only local seed could be planted. Prices for commercial potatoes in the spring of 1965 reached a record high, and in 1967, a team of researchers from UBC isolated 2 viruses which affect the growth and tonnage of seed potatoes. And they planted these stem cuttings on Clifford Ronan's farm. Pemberton had the first virus-free stock in North America, and they have maintained that industry ever since to this day. Today, there are more than 25 varieties grown in the valley by more than 15 growers who have 650 acres under production. So it's still big business in Pemberton. The Farmers Institute continued through to the early 40s as an institution, but it was fairly inactive between 1945 and 1953 because its function was taken over by the Seed Growers Association. And it was all the same people, so they were like, well, you can't have 2 meetings. So the Seed Association dominated for a while. When the seed market declined, the Farmers Institute was revitalized to lobby Agriculture Canada for changes in how things were marketed that came from Pemberton.
The Pemberton Superior School, which was built in 1951. As a direct result of lobbying efforts by local school trustees, the Pemberton Superior School came into being in 1951. A 2-room steel building, grade 1 to 10. 2 years later, the school bus began a run up the valley. In 1956, a much larger school was built for grade 1 to 12. The bus service expanded to Mount Currie in 1958. The number of students from Mount Currie who attended Pemberton High School, increased from 8 to 62 in 6 years. The first school trustees included Flynn and Margaret Fogberg. They are also the ones who founded the museum. Margaret was the teacher at the school from its inception. Later in her retirement, she and Flynn, along with others, founded the Pemberton Museum. Margaret was the first curator, and many of the images and the stories in this presentation were collected by her. Unfortunately, Margaret had passed away in 2010.
Life after the railway included an expanding population and an increase in services. Old records give some ideas of the concerns and triumphs of the day, but they don't really describe the day-to-day routine. The extreme weather, sometimes in deep snows, sometimes sloshing through floodwaters to get the job done. Viewed from a high point in the fall of 1939, the valley would have looked like a series of interconnected lakes. Considering the almost general wetness of the land, the isolation, the marketing problems, and the mosquitoes, the spirit of the people and their accomplishments are amazing. Settlers were mainly individualists from varied backgrounds, and by no means did they always agree with one another, but most of them did combine to help one another, not only at harvesting, but at building bees, but also when necessary, when they needed to band together and lobby for improvements like flooding and how to combat it. It was in 1947 that the Prairie Farmers Rehabilitation Act, this was a big grant, was available to fundamentally change things in the valley and improve drainage and prevent flooding. But this is a whole other tale for another time. The Diking District's anniversary is coming up in 2017, and we'll be starting to collect information about all the changes that project has made to the valley, as well as the efforts that are still underway today to keep residents safe from flooding. So we wanted to just share with you some of the brief stories between 1915 and the 1960s about what was going on in Pemberton. The average population of the area at that time was about 200 people, so it was a very small place. And I believe that the efforts of the early settlers were tremendous in ensuring that settlement was prosperous and permanent in